All right, it's that time of the year when people go on holidays and eat a lot of goats, but we here are taking stock of what's happened in 2014 insofar as journalism has gone the best and the worst of journalism. 2014, we're going to try and see what we did right and what we did wrong and where we can improve in the next year. And to my immediate right, we've got Victor Bwire, the Deputy CEO of the Media Council of Kenya. Thank you very much for joining us, especially on such short notice, Victor. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Right next to him, of course, is Robin Creel. She's the East Africa correspondent for E-News, based in South Africa. But of course, you've been based here for a couple of years. Thanks a lot for joining us, Robin. And right at the end over there is Robbie Koki-Ochieng. She is a communication specialist as well as a lecturer at United States International University, Africa. And she's going to be telling us now what the outsiders view and what all those students are saying about what we're doing in terms of journalism, right? And joining us from Mombasa is Father Gabriel Dolan. He's a priest as well as a columnist with the Daily Nation, writes a lot of articles on the weekend. Thank you very much for joining us, Father Dolan. We'll start with you, Father Dolan. And,
thank you.
And we'll start with the issue of terrorism. How journalists in Kenya have covered terrorism. You're in an area that is considered to be the hotbed of radicalization and somewhat a hotbed in terms of terrorism itself. Do you feel like the media has done its job in terms of telling the public what's what with regard to terrorism?
I think this is a whole new area for journalism.
Yeah.
And so we expect at the early stages a lot of mistakes to be made. But at this stage, the journalists should be on top of the situation. And they still don't seem to have got that management.
What do you think is wrong?
I would say is that journalists have been giving us the information, but in many ways they've also been part of spreading the terror.
In what ways?
They have not been able to penetrate and tell us what extent we have a problem with terrorism, what are the origins, where are the funds, and who are the managers of it. So we're still very much getting information of horror attacks, but not getting too much information what it's all about.
Okay. How about the issues the issue on radicalization? We've been hit quite hard about not explaining the context or at least the events that lead to the increasing radicalization down at the coast. Do you feel like that is something that we should take the blame for?
I also think it's like I said, this is new. This is new area also for journalism. And one part of the problem would be that with radicalization of the youth is that we've not been able to penetrate and find out how many youth have gone for training in Somalia, how many have returned, how many are active, how many have plans to get involved in terrorist activities. That's a difficulty. And then another part of it is, it has to be acknowledged, is this a minority? And it seems to me it is. But we've never looked until recently at the role that the state has been playing.
Okay, Father
like, for example, the extrajudicial killings, you know?
Yeah, keep going.
What impact has that on the radicalization of the youth? The failure of the state to properly investigate these killings, and the feeling that the law has been broke and sacrificed the rights of many people.
All right. Okay, Father Dolan, we'll get to you in a moment. Let's just bring this discussion back here in Nairobi. We'll start with you, Bwana Bwire. It's really a tale of two realities, as Father Dolan has explained, with regard to it being new ground that perhaps a lot of journalists haven't been used to or should be used to now, and the realities of what's going on the ground. As an organization that has been monitoring the work of journalists in Kenya, do you think that we are on the ball with respect to our coverage in Kenya of terrorism?
Well, I'll accept what the father has said, that this is a new terrain for journalists in Kenya. But the journalists have done the best they could under the existing circumstances. Because terrorism is a new thing. And while we appreciate that there have been challenges in some of the manner the journalists have, or media journal has covered and shown some of the issues, and from our media monitoring reports, some of the issues purely border on violation of the code of ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And you see the usage of obscene photos, glory, it's there in the code of ethics.
Yeah.
Some media houses have done that. But we also need to appreciate the fact that what we see and consider to be the gory pictures we are talking about is only a third.
Yeah.
You work in a broadcast. How many photos was from Peketoni, do you kill?
Mm-hmm.
So many of them. And when we see people blaming the media wholesome and how they think media has not done it well, sometimes we get concerned. And when we did a report on how media covered, for example, Westgate, Peketoni, and we did it together with the Minister of Defense and Security, and we launched it. Yeah. And the discussion was that, yes, our journalists might have messed it here and there, but they need to be supported. Terrorism is a new thing. Mm-hmm. How many of our journalism schools or newsroom have courses on terrorism? Mm-hmm. It's a new thing. So instead of bashing them, we should be helping build their capacity to deal with some of the issues that are coming.
Okay.
Again, the other thing is in the absence, like what the father has mentioned, you want to talk about how many youths have been radicalized, yes. You want to talk about what? But without an access to information law, how do journalists get that information?
Well, there is a law, but I think journalists haven't been active in terms of pursuing the access to information law. Right?
Article 35 says Parliament should enact a law.
Yes.
To facilitate that. But we don't have a law.
We don't have a law
and access to information.
Okay.
So how do journalists then write or get this information from the state on how many? Because this information, we believe, the state has it. But in the absence of a law to facilitate journalists to get some of this information,
right.
it becomes a challenge for journalists to do that.
All right. Robin, let's go to you. You covered Mpeketoni quite early on from when it started. As a person who's covered conflict in different parts of the continent, perhaps different parts of the world, do you think that we did the best that we could with Mpeketoni specifically, because the gore, the blood, the scale of the violence there was something unmitigated in terms of what we've seen in the recent past?
I have to stand up for Kenyan journalism here. I mean, obviously I'm a foreigner, but I watch a lot of your news because that's how I get a sense of what's going on and know which stories my TV station based in South Africa would be interested in. Yeah. And I think you guys do a stellar job. There's a lot of competition, so there's a lot of bars, and the bars constantly being raised. But having been a local journalist myself, I also know that the daily pressures oftentimes don't allow you to delve all that deeply into why and how this is going on, because you are under this daily deadline. So it's up to your investigative teams, and I believe investigative teams such as yourselves do a very good job. And in terms of Peketoni, it was incredibly gory, and it was something that I think even myself and foreign journalists had a hard time dealing with, because it was so foreign for this to have happened on Kenyan soil. Yeah. It seemed very, very strange. And I think another thing is security-wise, just how secure are journalists going to be in Kenya's northern, near the border with Somalia? Those are all new issues that are going to arise when you start seeing journalists getting their heads cut off and things like that. But I also believe it requires a lot more cooperation from the police. It requires a lot more truthfulness, people being forthcoming with information, so that we're not forced to delve into speculation.
Speaking of which, there's a very sensitive issue that's just come up in the recent past with the Al Jazeera's documentary on exposing what would be a killing squads within the police force and the legacy of extrajudicial killings as regards terrorism. Now, when journalists report about this issue, it seems to have, at least from public perception, become something that is rather subjective and something that that journalists should not delve into, especially at a time when, according to government speak, we're facing an insurgency and we all need to be united. What line is there, or is there a line in terms of coverage of what is a warlike situation and coverage of really what is the truth of what is happening on the ground with respect to the war on terror?
I think if the information is there and if people are talking, then it's our duty to tell the truth. I don't think that we need to be thinking of in terms of national unity, although that is hugely important, obviously, but that's government's role.
Yeah.
If they want to unite the people, then they need to put systems in place where dialogue is happening and where different groups are talking to each other. It's not up to journalists to sit down and say, well, I might upset this person if I say that. Obviously, if you're going to air, I believe if you're going to air things that are extremely upsetting, there are other channels. For example, in South Africa, we have the Broadcasting Complaints Commission, where if I air a photograph of someone with his head cut off and someone writes in and complains about it, I, as a journalist, stand to be disciplined because, is that fair? What if that was your father, etc., etc. But I don't believe that is our role to be national unifiers. That lies in government.
Okay, Koki, let me just come to you and put you on the spot here a little bit, because you have the pride of place in being able to observe this and learn very quickly from our mistakes and teach a generation of new journalists. In terms of a score out of 10, of our coverage of terrorism, what kind of score would you give us?
I would give you 5, because I think...
It's right on the line there.
Yes, right in the middle, because I think for the novelty of the issue, it's new, it's something that is, happening in quick succession and can cause a lot of confusion. I'll give you a 5, because again, the media has to go ahead and give, the other side of the story, give a balanced story. Look for the youth that you're claiming are being recruited and have a story on them and why they're getting into that particular issue. It would also be prudent to know that media, of course, has to tell the story first, because terrorism and media kind of coexist. And of course, the purpose will be to instill fear. But media has a role to go further ahead and demystify what terrorism is and what the facets are, so that the public understand the importance, for example, of supporting maybe the security and the media in curtailing maybe people who are involved in those kind of exercises.
All right, what are the learning points for you in class, and what are you passing on to your students about the experiences that we have in terms of covering terrorism?
I think the key interest in any journalism classroom now is safety of the journalist. Just to see that, the journalist reports a story and is taken care of. Issues of taking care of yourself is important. I think one of my students was covering one of those violence incidences during elections, and she told us that she was left behind with the camera, and of course the first thing that you ask for is the camera. So of course issues of safety. But then again, we are also talking about, telling the incident, talking about the terrorism incident, but being sure that you have follow-up stories that basically soften the issue and put it into context.
All right. Father Dolan, let me come back to you. Let's move away from terrorism now to an issue that a lot of people have discussed with respect to coverage this year, and that's the issue of corruption. We'll pick a number of big-ticket issues here as we go along in 2014. 2014, of course, saw Kenya pay out quite a bit of money to very shadowy individuals with regard to Anglo-leasing payments. We've heard of other scandals that have come out, missing money, and in fact, you've written about this with respect to missing money from our budget, about 30%. Do you think that we've gone deep enough in explaining the extent of corruption and uncovering it here in Kenya as journalists?
I think we have to be concerned with the everyday corruption, but also the mega corruption. We have to look at those huge scandals and present it in such a manner is that there will be an outrage, that people will feel that things must be accounted. But there's a danger that we may suffer from corruption fatigue, as I've been writing. But the reality is, we've just seen from Transparency International that Kenya was rated 145 out of 175 countries in terms of the corruption index. And that would indicate that we're among the failed states, that unless we respond quickly and promptly, corruption will kill this country. Especially recently, when we've been able to see that even Al-Shabaab have been involved in the sugar industry, that's killing our own local sugar industry, and also that they're benefiting from smuggling in a manner that that smuggling is funding their own activities.
All right,
this
Father
is
Dolan,
a very worrying consideration.
Father Dolan, let me just jump in there.
So I think it's very difficult because there's corruption always fights back. And the other part of it is maybe at times the press too is corrupted, that journalists are corrupted, and that they go so far and then the stories are dropped.
Yeah.
Like we've had this story of the land out in Karen. It was there in the news, it has disappeared. I often wonder why we get so far with corruption stories and then they disappear.
That might be a case of two things. Let me just jump in there, Father Dolan. That might be a case of two things, where the news agenda rolls on faster than people might expect, and those stories just keep on dropping down in the pecking order of things. But that's really no excuse. You mentioned something very interesting about fatigue in covering corruption and other issues. Generally speaking, it can also be violence in our society. But you've also said something about the manner in which we should be covering these things so that they remain interesting. Give me one learning point before we come back here. One learning point and maybe one thing that we can do better in 2015 in terms of covering corruption and stepping back, or rather avoiding this fatigue.
Well, just to deal with the issue of fatigue, I think we need to feel that we can actually address one or two of the issues, because that is the main thing. If the fatigue is coming from the helplessness, if we manage to take on one or two key cases and have successful prosecutions, that will send a message to all the others. So it's to give. The fatigue leads to hopelessness. So we must give back hope and so be more focused in our tackling of some of these issues.
Okay. All right, Robin, let's move on to something else. We don't have much time here to discuss the entire year in 2014, but another accusation that has been leveled against us is in the manner with which we have covered people's stories, that politics, especially politics that really isn't very consequential to development, politics that really isn't consequential to the lives of people, is what you see in our dailies and personality-based politics. What do you think is a problem there? And very quickly, how do you think we can step away from that in 2015?
I think obviously people enjoy reading the sort of gossipy parts of whatever high-profile politician is doing this week. So I think in essence we are, and the Kenyan media is as well, catering to what people enjoy reading. How will they be able to counter that, John? I think you just have to take the high road sometimes as a newspaper or as a TV station and decide, I'm going to cover a certain issue about how it affects this farmer out in the middle of Kisumu, rather than who danced with who at a high-profile wedding, for example.
Koki, are we taking the high road, as Robin mentioned?
I agree with Robin, because the approach that the media has taken is what we are calling today in media studies, mediatization of, for example, devolved government, where you just want to talk about the sensationalization of issues instead of delving in to explain to the public exactly what the processes of devolution are. And even not just explain the processes, but give them an understanding or a breakdown as to what to expect every quarter or every stage of devolution, so that they, in fact, can become active participants in the devolution process.
Okay, Victor, where are the gaps? Because you've been a practitioner for a while. Where are the gaps that lead us to focus on the sensationalism, as has been mentioned, instead of the actual issues? And as you answer, we've got a couple of tweets that we're just going to run on our Super War. Where are the gaps?
Three things first.
One,
that Kenya is competing with South Africa in terms of producing the best journalists on the continent. And the CNN award can tell you who won. That already tells you where Kenya journalism is, despite those challenges. So we need to appreciate. There are people who still believe Kenya does not have the best long-distance runners. And that's where we are. Journalists in Kenya are doing their best. Within the challenges that are there, obviously there are challenges being that we are seeing through media workers.
Yeah, and
we
what
have
are,
two people.
what are those gaps?
We have we have journalists and media workers. And the biggest problem, where even the media council will tell you, is that we're having problem with media workers. We have people have infiltrated newsrooms, and we have quite a big number of people who are not trained journalists, who are not exposed even to a single article in the Code of Ethics for the practice of journalism in this country. And those are the biggest challenges we're having.
Okay.
Who then, once, especially outside Nairobi, you get the people who are working in our FM stations, you'll be surprised. And that's a major challenge you're having, which we need. What is the exposure? When people are employed in newsrooms, what is the level of orientation to the Code of Ethics or practice of journalism? That's a major challenge that we must address.
Okay.
3, there's training of journalists. And I can tell you there are people who take 2 weeks and get a diploma in journalism. The others take 2 years, get a diploma in journalism. And if you look at the productivity of those two people, because journalism now, just like any profession, everybody is opening a kiosk everywhere, River Road, training journalists. And you ask even the people who are training the people we call journalists or media workers, you'll be surprised. So that's a major challenge that we must address. What is the quality of training? If somebody says he's training journalists in radio production, and students finish 1 year without seeing a microphone, and they're graduating to go in a newsroom, you obviously see the challenge that we are going to get.
Okay.
But obviously, like you said, one, we must relook at who is getting in the newsroom. The training must be made to adopt. The issue of orientation of the Code of Ethics for the practice of journalism in this country, people must be oriented.
All right.
That's a major issue.
Okay.
The issue of employment, who is getting in the newsroom? Journalists must be employed, not media workers. While we appreciate that they have talent and they have but we need journalists to be employed in newsrooms, and you would see a huge change in the way journalism is practiced in this country.
Okay, something that goes in tandem with what he's talking about is the running ahead of social media at various stages in terms of reporting or breaking stories online. And this is a phenomenon across the world. But in Kenya, at least on social media, and you know Kenyans on Twitter can be very, very harsh, it seems like we are far, far behind the curve of reporting news and having very robust discussions. Do you think that is a sign, Koki, of the dearth of intellect and professionalism in our profession right now?
Well, John, a lot of what is going on in social media in Kenya today can be seen to be incivility, where people just want to vent out, on issues that otherwise should generate debate. But I'm seeing a lot of effort from media houses where they have their own online, way of penetrating into our spaces and giving, what we call the prosumers, some information that they can build stories on. So there's that symbiotic relationship between those online and, of course, the media. And with time, the debates also change because even if the discussion begins and it becomes in civil at some point, you have what we call editorial judgment coming in, one person putting sense into the debate, and with time, I think, we'll improve.
And the brow will become higher, as
yes,
they say. Let me just go to Father Dolan very quickly in Mombasa. As we wind up, Father Dolan, unfortunately, there's a very finite space for discussing things such as this. But I want you to tell me what one thing you'd like to see journalists do better in 2015.
I'd like to see the media houses treat journalists better, because we seem to have a hierarchy of journalists in media houses, where those at the top earn well and comfortable salaries, but as stringers live in very difficult conditions and are very poorly treated. I'd like to see an improvement at that level. And I would also like to take the glitter away from journalism. Let it be more focused, more real, and let it also feel it has a mission to defend the weak, to highlight injustice, and has a mission to correct it. That's
okay.
What was.
All right, Father Dolan, thank you very much. We'll leave it there with you. Let me just go around here for final comments. Robin, I'll start with you. What do you want to see done better in Kenya with respect to journalism in 2015?
John Allen, as I said to you when you asked me to be on the panel this morning, I'm from Zimbabwe. And I'd like journalists in Kenya to really fight for their rights. There are a lot of amendments and proposals, and obviously any government in the world would love to control its own media.
Yeah.
Any government anywhere in the world would love to control its own media. We have to stand up for ourselves. We have to stand up for each other. Local news needs to stand up for foreign journalists. Foreign journalists need to stand up for local news. Fixers need to be looked after. Freelancers need to be looked after. We've got to watch our back.
All right. Koki, final comment. What do you want to see done better in 2015 by the likes of myself and other people?
I'd like to see the media telling us development stories, telling us things aligned to what is happening to us, explaining them further and deeper. I'd also like to see media houses setting different agenda. Of course, taking the same story and giving it a different angle, framing issues in such a way that, of course, it doesn't seem as if it is supportive so much of one perspective. I'd like to see that blend of information coming in.
All right. We're two questions very quickly. Where is the statement on the Security Amendments Bill from the Media Council? And finally, of course, what would you like to see done better in 2015? Start with a statement.
The statement will be read on Monday morning,
yes,
where we have done an analysis of the Media Council of what we think is wrong with the security bill, especially on aspects that relate to media. Mm-hmm. Most of the aspects that have been captured in the security bill are already in existence. If you look at the Code of Ethics for the practice of journalism in Kenya, Schedule 2 of the Media Council Act, almost all those things are addressed. If you look at the Broadcasting Code that is being administered by CAK, those things are addressed. So we don't need another. If you look at the Copyright and Books Registration Act, those things, Kenya Broadcasting Act, almost all those things are. So we are just adding too many laws that will not help. What we need is not more laws. It's just to reinforce what we have.
Okay. All right, and you heard it first here, of course, the media councils stand on it. But very quickly, Victor, what would you like to see in 2015?
One, more investment by media houses in journalists, so that we get people outside there who are paid so that they can do their work.
Okay.
Two, the other thing is training and orientation on code of ethics for the practice of journalism. If we can get our colleagues who are in the various newsrooms to get acquainted on the code, what the code requires of them to do, and respecting it, we are good.
Okay.
Then obviously the third thing is that, again, investment in the media. There are people who are employing, for example, local media stations, which everybody is complaining about. And we employ Bontaos who are not very fluent even the languages those stations are licensed to do. Mm-hmm. But we expect them to speak. So we are getting people out of 10 minutes, 7 minutes is in English, yet these are vernacular radio stations. We need more investment in training our journalists, and the issues obviously of specialization. We need specialization. Journalists must now start moving to specialize in particular areas so that we get the in-depth stories we are talking about. Yeah. But if anybody comes and is assigned everything, then we must. So this calls for investment. Okay. Then obviously we need space from advertisers and media owners. Journalists must be given space to do their work, because some of the titles, some of the headlines we are talking about are determined by media owners and the advertisers who feel they should control content. We need that editorial independence for journalists to do their work, and we have the best in the continent.
Victor, we'll have to leave it there. Very, 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 very strong way of ending it. I have to say here, I agree with you in terms of that. Victor Bwira, the Deputy CEO of Media Council of Kenya, as well as Robin Creel from E-News Channel Africa, and Koki Ocheng from USIU. And joining us, of course, from Mombasa was Gabriel Ndolan, Father Gabriel Ndolan. He is a priest and a commentator, right? Has a panel in the Daily Nation. We take a short break, but we will be taking your feedback on this subject. Hashtag, of course, is best and worst. And we'll follow that right after this break. Stay with us.